So you find yourself writing a story, a novel, a short story, a play, a video game, a script of some sort, and you have a character that speaks uh, dialogue in a dialect that's not standard English, and you have this choice to make. Do you write in dialect, or do you write in a more sort of formal, standard written English? Now, this is a controversial topic, especially historically. There have been eras when it was completely acceptable and expected to write in dialect, and there have been eras in American literature when it was more taboo. And I want to explore some of the divisions on this. I think one of the main divisions on whether to write in dialect or not to write in dialect comes down to a sort of fundamental understanding of the language itself. If someone has a deep feeling that there is a true version of English language, a correct version of English language, and dialects are somehow a, a fork off of that main path, then writing dialect where there's a mispronunciation might, or a pronunciation that's not standard, or a spelling that's not standard, to convey the actual language would be more true, so to speak, if you wrote it the way that the Oxford English Dictionary or the American Heritage Dictionary would write it. There's another way to view language, which is that language is dynamic and evolving, and that there are multiple versions of a language which are all just as valid and equally true as any other. No one has a monopoly to say what is or isn't the real version of language. Now, with English, there was, like all languages, moments historically that sort of accelerate change and moments which limit the amount of change. The King James Bible and Shakespeare were both such sort of durable mileposts in the development of the English language that they froze the language for quite a while, and we sort of had a legacy of quite a long time where you could refer to sources that had a sort of true version of the language. The Quran did a similar thing for Arabic. There is this very distinct sort of milepost in the development of the language, which you can look back to and refer to as a standard. A lot of modern scholars, a favorite among mine, John McWhorter, who wrote the book Talking Back, Talking Black, goes through some arguments about why Black American English is a valid and distinct language in its own right. This would be extremely controversial just 30 years ago when it was out of vogue to write in dialect, and expressing written dialogue in dialect was akin to a sort of minstrel show or blackface, or lampooning people who use language as separate than the standard as being less than the standard. I think the sort of more modern take, as I'm reading it, is that the standard is only the standard because one group of people say it's the standard, but they don't really have ownership of a language any more than anyone else does, and everyone gets to sort of define their communication with their peers in their community and everyone they talk and listen to in the ways that they would like to. I think dialect can be a little bit tricky. To use an example that speaks, to avoid any potential landmines, that speaks to my own experience. Before there was a TV show Fargo, there was a movie Fargo that not only took place very close to where I grew up, it was actually filmed very close to where I grew up. And they really leaned into this sort of post-Scandinavian sing-songy dialect of sort of Western Minnesotan Midwesterners. And it was very divisive. Some people thought it was delightful, and that it was sort of bringing that dialect to the to the wider nation, and some people thought it was an embarrassment and that they were being made fun of. And I can understand both points. To have a character that is a cartoon of the people that lived in my town and grew up, in the same places I did, that character isn't necessarily the fact that character is speaking in dialect isn't necessarily disparaging that dialect or calling it lesser. I think my personal take on this has changed over the years, and I'm at a point where I believe that is acknowledging that language to be a sub-version of English. If that were to live in isolation for long enough, not real likely in the 21st century when we have the internet, but if that were to live in isolation for long enough, we would have sort of spin-off side languages, which we see all over the place. All of the Pidgin and Creole languages that exist, you can't really say that Haitian Creole isn't a real language. It had its origins in French, but it is distinct from French spelling and pronunciation and all of that. So to write a character who speaks Haitian Creole, and if you were to translate that into a more classical, traditional French instead of Haitian Creole, I think that would be doing a disservice to that. I think that would be not acknowledging the reality that is now a separate language. The very early Proto-Creole would have been a lot closer to the sort of ancestral French. It would have been much more akin to a dialect. At what point can you call it a dialect versus a completely separate language is up for debate and probably varies on a case-by-case basis. But I think acknowledging that a dialect might not be a completely separate language, but is just as valid of a version of a language as any other, is a good way to approach it. So long as you do it with respect, so long as you don't do it as a way to diminish another culture or to lampoon them or to make it a sort of minstrel show or blackface. As fiction writers, we might end up writing dialects that demonstrate in-group or out-group membership for groups that don't exist in the real world. We might have, Elvish or Dwarvish languages or some science fiction colony that lives on another planet that has developed their own spin-off of a language. I've recently been going through the TV show The Expanse. They do a wonderful job of showing characters who live in the asteroid belt as having a unique speech pattern. That's not diminishing a real cultural group. That's using a difference in language and acknowledging that they are on a path to they're developing their own culture and they're on a path to developing their own language. They have a sort of subversion of the language, a subset, not subversion, another version of the language that we speak, and their version of the language is just as valid and they have just as much ownership of that as we have of our version of the language, however you speak to your friends and your peers and the people you speak to and listen to. So as you write dialogue, with or without dialect, it's a tough choice. The mechanics of it are difficult. Most of the advice that I see is avoid it, stay away from it. If you're going to use it extremely sparingly. I think the challenge with it is to do it well, and we don't have a lot of practice doing it. The only time we might do it might be when we find ourselves 10 chapters deep in a novel and we haven't thought about it, we don't really know, we haven't let those ideas rattle around in our head as much. We might not have tried to pronounce these words as written or asked our friends to read the words as written to see if they're pronounced the way that we expect. It's a challenging thing, and it takes some deliberate consideration and a lot of cognitive focus to to get right and to avoid some pitfalls. If you have thoughts or comments on this, I think I would love to hear about them. Please add them in the comments below this. I think the most famous example of writing in dialect would probably be Mark Twain. It's kind of hard. I mean, definitely was writing in a different era than us, but good enough for Mark Twain, good enough for me, right? So add your thoughts. The more we continue these conversations and the more we develop these ideas, the better all of our writing will be, and the more we'll enjoy each other's writing. So thank you very much.